Dina had always been a woman who measured outcomes, and trusted her ability to endure. But at 34, she felt the subtle weight of expectations, some spoken, many not. Friends were deep into family life, relatives asked careful questions that lingered long after the conversations ended. And time no longer felt like a distant companion. It walked beside her now, close enough to be heard. She met Sahel at work in a way that felt almost accidental. Their relationship was strictly work-related. They shared tasks before they shared thoughts, exchanged emails before laughter. Sahel was attentive without being intrusive, thoughtful in ways that revealed themselves slowly. Over time, his feelings became clear, not through grand gestures, but through consistency. He remembered her preferences, waited for her after meetings, checked in on days when she seemed withdrawn. Dina appreciated this devotion, even if she did not feel it in equal measure. When Sahel proposed, she did not answer immediately. She weighed the future carefully, as she always did. She knew he loved her deeply. She knew he would be loyal, steady, and kind. And she knew too, that she was afraid of waiting any longer for something more certain to appear. In the end, she accepted, convincing herself that affection could grow into love for him, and that security had its own quiet beauty. The marriage required sacrifice. Their workplace policy allowed no unions between colleagues, and after several conversations and much quiet consideration, Dina resigned. Sahel's job seemed stable, his career path clearer. She told herself she was choosing wisely, that she could always rebuild her own professional life later. Still, on her last day, as she cleared her desk and handed in her badge, she felt a small, private sense of loss she did not share with anyone. Their early months together were calm, if not passionate. They learned how to exist in the same space. Evenings were spent cooking simple meals, discussing news, making modest plans. Sahel was gentle with her, careful not to demand more than she could give. Sahel's love for her was unwavering. It reminded her of the imbalance she had chosen to overlook. At heart, she knew that Sahel's love and devotion outweighed hers. Then the redundancy came. A short meeting. A formal explanation. A box to carry home. Sahel tried to remain composed, but the change was immediate. He woke earlier, slept less, scrolled endlessly through job listings. Money became a topic they circled carefully. Dina felt a quiet guilt settle in her chest. She had left her job for his, and now neither of them had the certainty they once relied upon. It was during this unsettled time that her body began to feel unfamiliar. Fatigue clung to her. Food tasted different, and when the truth finally became clear, it arrived without celebration. She sat alone at first, the house unusually still, holding the knowledge as though it were something delicate and easily broken. Telling Sahel was harder than she expected. His face shifted through surprise, worry, and something like sadness. He smiled, but the smile did not fully reach his eyes. He pulled her into an embrace that felt protective, almost apologetic. They spoke softly that night, acknowledging fears without resolving them. The future seemed both fuller and more uncertain than it had ever been. In the weeks that followed, Dina found herself changing, not just physically, but inwardly. She watched Sahel try again and again, refusing to surrender to despair, and something in her softened. The careful logic she had built her life upon began to loosen. She no longer felt entirely certain of the choices she had made, yet she could not deny the quiet strength forming between them. Their life was no longer certain. It was uneven, unfinished, and unsure. But within that fragility, Dina sensed the beginning of something unplanned, something that asked not for calculation, but for patience, presence, and a kind of faith she had never fully practiced before. Time did not soften their circumstances, as Dina had hoped it might. Instead, it pressed harder. Sahel found occasional work, brief stretches of promise that never quite settled into stability. Each opportunity slipped away just as they began to breathe again. Dina learned how long days could feel when uncertainty lived inside them. Worry became a constant presence in the house. When their daughter was born, they named her Madina. She arrived small and fragile, her cries filling the spaces that conversation no longer could. Dina loved her fiercely and instinctively, yet motherhood deepened her exhaustion rather than easing it. Sleep was scarce. Money was scarcer. Sahel kept trying, she could see that, but effort did not translate into relief. Hope, when spoken aloud, sounded thin. It was during this period that her mother began to visit more often. She observed the strain without commentary at first, then gradually allowed her concerns to surface. She reminded Dina of the life she had left behind, of the comforts she once knew, of how difficult it was to raise a child without security. Over time, they settled into Dina's thoughts, giving shape to feelings she had been quietly avoiding. Eventually, Dina told Sahel she wanted to leave. The conversation unfolded slowly and painfully. Sahel pleaded with her, with a raw sincerity that unsettled her. He told her he was trying, that he had not stopped believing things would change. He asked for time, for patience, for trust. Dina listened, but something in her had already withdrawn. She told him she was tired, that she could no longer carry the weight of waiting. She said she was no longer interested in the marriage, as though saying it plainly might dull its sharpness. She left with their daughter Madina shortly afterward. Sahel watched the door close behind them and felt something collapse inside him. The days that followed were hollow. Still, he tried to live. He tended to his routines, held on to his faith, and learned to move through grief quietly. He told himself that surviving was a form of resistance, that one day he would understand how he had arrived there. Months passed. Dina's life shifted again, unexpectedly. She met a man whose wealth was evident even in the way he spoke about ordinary things. He showed interest in marriage, offering stability and ease, things she had long been denied. But his conditions were firm. He did not want Madina in his home. Once again, Dina turned to her mother. The advice came without hesitation. Her mother advised her that the child would survive, that Sahel was the child's father, thus responsibility ultimately belonged to him. Practicality, once more, took precedence over emotion. So Dina returned Madina to her father. When Sahel saw his daughter, the moment caught in his throat. He did not argue. He took the child into his arms, holding her as though she were something sacred and irretrievable all at once. In that quiet exchange, nothing was resolved, but everything had changed. And life, as it often unfolded, continued forward without apology, leaving each of them to reckon with the choices they had made and the ones that had been made for them. Sahel had entered marriage with a heart that was open and earnest, believing that love, when paired with effort and patience, could withstand even the harshest seasons, but it didn't. The departure left a deep, lingering ache. It was not merely the loss of companionship that wounded him, but the feeling of being abandoned by the woman he had loved without reservation. He had given her his loyalty, his gentleness, and his belief in a shared future, and yet he found himself alone, holding the fragments of a life that had not unfolded as he imagined. Still, life demanded continuation. With a heart weighed down by grief, he rose each morning and did what needed to be done. He worked where work was available, accepted setbacks with quiet dignity, and learned how to stretch limited means to cover endless needs. Some days were harder than others. There were evenings when exhaustion blurred into despair, when silence became loud and memories refused to rest. Yet even in those moments, he did not surrender himself to bitterness. Instead, he turned inward, placing his pain before God in whispered prayers, trusting that nothing endured without meaning. Time and patience softened the sharp edges of his sorrow. It was during this season, when he no longer sought rescue but simply resilience, that his life shifted once more. By what he later recognized as divine arrangement. He met a woman called Zainab whose presence felt different from the beginning. She did not measure him by his struggles, nor did she fear the scars they had left. She saw him clearly and loved him quietly, without conditions or expectations. She was the daughter of a businessman, raised with both comfort and responsibility. Her father, a man of vision and discipline, eventually entrusted his business to her, confident in her integrity and judgment. When she chose to marry Sahel, it was not an act of convenience or charity. It was love, unadorned, intentional, and deeply rooted. Zainab married Sahel because she believed in him. Not because of what he lacked or what he might one day provide. As the years passed, their marriage blossomed, shaped by shared responsibilities and the gentle chaos of raising children. 4 were born to them in time, 2 boys and 2 girls, each arrival greeted with hope and gratitude. The house grew louder and fuller. It was alive in ways Sahel had once feared it never would be. From the outside, their home appeared complete. But within that fullness, there was an imbalance. His daughter Madina from his first marriage lived amongst them. But she was never quite within them or one of them. It revealed itself in ordinary moments, the kind that pass unnoticed unless one is already looking. She was given less patience, fewer comforts and gentler care withheld without explanation. Where the other children moved freely, Madina hesitated. Where laughter came easily for the rest, she learned to measure her joy. Zainab did not speak openly of her feelings toward Madina, but they surfaced in these subtleties. There was a distance she maintained, a reluctance to offer Madina what she gave her own children. It was not cruelty in the loud sense, but something quieter, a steady absence of warmth and emotional presence that left its mark all the same. Madina sensed it before she could name it. Children often do. She learned to fold herself into corners, to help without being asked. She learned to avoid becoming a burden. Home, for her, became a place of careful navigation rather than rest. Sahel noticed, though sometimes later than he wished he had. When he did, it sat heavily within him. He tried, in his own way, to soften what he could, and he also overlooked so many things because he felt that confrontation would only make things worse. He overlooked it because looking directly at it would require him to choose, and he was terrified of what choosing would cost. He believed this made him a good father. He overlooked the way his wife Zainab praised her own children lavishly while acknowledging Madina only when correction was needed. He overlooked the subtle rewriting of family stories, where his first child became an afterthought, a footnote, a complication. On the other hand, Madina could not understand how belonging could feel partial. How a place could be home and yet require constant adjustment. When something went wrong, she assumed it had begun with her. Not because she was outrightly told but because that was the simplest explanation. She became thoughtful, quieter, and withdrawn. She chose her words carefully and accepted little without complaint. Madina's relationship with her mother was thin and fragile, reduced to brief exchanges and distance. Her mother's husband still did not welcome the connection, and so it remained minimal and restrained by circumstances. Over time, Madina stopped reaching for what did not reach back. She felt lonely in a way that didn't always look like loneliness. It didn't announce itself with tears or tantrums. Most days, it sat quietly with her, a dull ache she carried from room to room and from year to year. In her own home, she moved like a guest who had stayed too long. She was always careful, polite, and invisible. Sadness found her in quiet moments. Like when she ate alone. When she heard her name spoken without affection. When she saw other girls held easily by families that fit together without effort. Those moments pressed on her chest. But she still hoped, even when hope hurt. Madina still believed that somewhere, someday, there would be a space where she didn't have to shrink to fit. A place where warmth would not feel conditional. That thought stayed with her, steady and quiet, offering comfort as her life moved forward. Then, on an ordinary yet fateful day during her high school years, she attended a wedding, the celebration of a friend's relative. The hall was filled with soft lights, and the hum of conversation. It was there, amid the movement and color, that she met Yusuf. He was attentive in a way she was unaccustomed to. His charm was gentle rather than overwhelming, his interest felt sincere. As they spoke, she felt something unfamiliar, a sense of being noticed without effort and being heard without explanation. They exchanged numbers, and in the days that followed, their conversations grew easy and familiar. In time, Yusuf spoke openly about himself. He told her he was ready to settle down and that he had reached a point in life where he wanted stability and commitment. He mentioned a past relationship, with a woman named Gloria, whom he had once hoped to build a future with. It had ended, he said, not by his choice. She had left, and though it had taken time, he insisted he was no longer tied to that chapter. He was ready, he said, to move on. She listened carefully, as she always did. Something in his certainty felt reassuring, and something in his attention stirred the quiet hope she had carried for so long. The hope that perhaps this was a doorway to that long-imagined place where she might finally belong. Yusuf was 8 years older than Madina, a difference that might have made her pause under other circumstances. But it did not. His age felt like steadiness and reassurance. She told herself that perhaps this was what she had been waiting for all along, a place to rest, a person who could offer the safety she had imagined for so many years. The way he spoke, the certainty in his plans, the attention he gave her all seemed to point toward permanence. So in Yusuf, she believed she had found that safe place. He felt like an answer to the quiet longing she had carried for most of her life. She spoke honestly with him. She told him she also wanted to settle down, but not immediately. She needed time to finish high school and time to step into adulthood with some measure of footing beneath her. Only then, she believed, would she be strong enough to stand before her family, to argue her case and to ask for acceptance with confidence. When she finally completed high school, the conversation she had been postponing could no longer be avoided. She brought up Yusuf's name at home. It was not a sudden declaration, but a careful one, spoken with the hope that being honest and direct might soften what she feared was coming. The resistance was immediate. Her father listened, then responded with firm disapproval. He told her she was still too young, that marriage could wait. He told her that her focus should be on college and securing her future before tying herself to anyone. His concerns were practical, rooted in caution and long-term thinking. But she did not retreat as she once might have. Something in her had shifted. She pushed back, quietly but persistently, insisting that this was what she wanted. College, she argued, could wait. Marriage felt like an escape to her and a promise of the belonging she had never known. She clung to the belief that love, once found, should not be postponed. And though home was filled with tension and disagreement, Madina held her ground, convinced that her choice would finally lead her to the place she had been searching for all along. Her persistence wore down her father's resistance. It was not sudden acceptance, but a gradual yielding. Her family finally agreed to the marriage and the wedding took place. Life with Yusuf began beautifully. He was attentive, affectionate, and proud to call her his wife. Their home felt warm in ways she had longed for, filled with kindnesses and shared goals. For the first time, Madina felt anchored, as though the restlessness she carried had found a place to settle. Yusuf worked diligently, and she took comfort in the fact that he provided well. She told herself she was safe now, and that belief brought her peace. Children followed in good time, a daughter first, then a son. Motherhood reshaped her days completely. The house echoed with cries, laughter, and the soft exhaustion that comes with caring for young lives. She loved her children deeply and poured herself into them, determined to give them what she herself had once lacked. Still, a quiet desire lingered within her. She spoke, from time to time, of continuing her education. She imagined herself studying again, reclaiming a part of herself she had set aside. But each time she raised the idea, Yusuf listened calmly and responded with reassurance. There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. He told her there was no rush, that the children needed her fully, that education could wait. He reminded her that he was providing for the family. He reminded her that she lacked nothing, and that her presence at home mattered more than any degree. She accepted his reasoning. It seemed practical and loving. The children were young, after all, and his support allowed her to stay with them without worry. So she waited, telling herself there would be time later. It was around this time that Yusuf began to change. Not suddenly and not in ways that could be easily named. He came home later. His presence thinned. Conversations shortened and his attention drifted. She told herself this was normal, that work and responsibility altered people. But the distance continued to grow, settling into the spaces where closeness once lived. Then she noticed what could no longer be ignored. His phone was guarded. Certain calls were taken privately. Eventually, the truth revealed itself. Gloria was back in his life. The past he had described as finished had quietly returned, reclaiming emotional ground he no longer offered at home. The realization struck deeply, not only as betrayal, but as recognition. Once again, she felt herself being edged out of a space she had believed was safe. She thought of the parts of herself she had postponed, the patience she had practiced and the faith she had placed in his certainty. She did not confront him immediately. Instead, she carried the knowledge in silence, tending to her children and maintaining the appearance of normalcy. But inwardly, something changed. The future she had imagined no longer felt secure. She confronted Yusuf on a Tuesday night. The children were asleep, unaware that the foundation beneath them had already cracked. She didn't shout. She surprised herself with how calm her voice sounded as she confronted him. He laughed first. A quick, defensive sound. He told her she was imagining things, that she was tired, stressed, and reading too much into nothing. He turned it around on her with practiced ease. He asked why she didn't trust him and how she could think so little of their marriage. For a moment, doubt flickered in her chest, old habits rushing in to protect him. Then she named the details. The messages. The lies. The way his absences no longer lined up. Silence stretched between them, thick and unmistakable. His shoulders sagged, and something slipped from his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. It just happened, he said. I didn't mean for it to. He cried and apologized. He promised it was over, that Madina was his life, that he would do whatever it took to fix what he had broken. He swore it all with shaking hands and a desperation that almost looked like love. She wanted to believe him. For the children. For the years already spent. For the version of him she still carried in her memory. For a while, things looked better. He was attentive, present and loving. But the pit never closed, it only grew quieter. Then the lies returned, thinner this time and easier to see through. Late nights. Familiar excuses. A guarded phone. When Madina asked again, he grew angry instead of afraid. Told her she was suffocating him. He told her that he needed space. One morning, he packed a bag. Not many things, just enough to signal permanence. He said he was confused, that he needed time, that he still loved his children. By nightfall, Madina learned he had moved in with Gloria. Even though he had promised to leave her. She stood in the doorway of the quiet house, her children clinging to her legs, and felt the full weight of what had happened. At first, she refused to let the ending settle. She told herself that people made mistakes. She texted him, reminding him of the things he had sworn to do, therapy, honesty, choosing his family. She asked if they could start slowly, rebuild something small and true. I'm still here, she told him. I'm trying. You said you would try too. He listened with a distant politeness, as if she were describing a life he had once read about but no longer inhabited. He said he was overwhelmed, that everything felt complicated, that she needed to accept reality. When she mentioned his promises, his jaw tightened. That was before, he said. Things are different now. Different meant he didn't come home. Different meant his phone calls grew shorter, more transactional. Different meant he spoke of his new life with a defensiveness that left no room for her hope. Each attempt cost her something: sleep, dignity, and the last scraps of certainty she had about love. He refused to honor her work, her patience, her willingness to forgive what had already torn her open. Eventually, he told her she was clinging to the past, that she needed to move on, even as he continued to benefit from her steadiness with the children, her reliability, and her loyalty. One afternoon, as she stood alone in the kitchen, rereading a message she had sent him, another reminder of his promises, that was unanswered. Something finally gave way. She saw then that saving the marriage required two people reaching forward, not one person bleeding backward. And for the first time since everything had begun to unravel, she stopped asking him to choose her. He then started to cut them off slowly. It started with him doing less. At first, he still sent money, but she had to remind him. What used to be automatic became awkward conversations she dreaded. She would text him about school fees or groceries, and he would take days to respond, if he responded at all. When he did, there was often an edge to it, as though she were asking for something personal instead of support for his own children. Sometimes he'd say he was short that month. Sometimes he'd say he would send it later. And sometimes nothing came, and she filled the gap herself, quietly taking out of her savings in order to hold things together for her and their children. She didn't tell the children. She just adjusted. Over time, the help became inconsistent. One month he'd send something, the next month nothing. When she asked what was going on, he got defensive. He said he was already doing more than enough. He said she needed to manage better and that his situation had changed and she had to accept that. Eventually, the payments stopped altogether. Her messages asking about rent or school expenses went unanswered. When she called, he said he was busy or accused her of always making things about money. After a while, she stopped calling because each attempt left her feeling smaller. At the same time, he became harder to reach in every way. He didn't check in on the children. What hurt the most wasn't just the lack of money. It was the way he seemed to step out of their lives without looking back, as if walking away from the marriage had somehow allowed him to walk away from them too. She carried the practical weight and the emotional one. And even though it exhausted her, she showed up, every day, because unlike him, she didn't get to opt out. Eventually, the gaps caught up with her. She ran out of money in small, humiliating ways at first, then came the notices. She sat at the table late at night, phone in hand and numbers refusing to add up no matter how many times she tried. There was nothing left to move around. Nothing left to stretch. Some nights, after the children were asleep, she cried herself to sleep quietly, her face pressed into the pillow so no one would hear. Her thoughts always drifted back to what she had believed marriage would be for her. She had thought it would finally give her a sense of belonging, of being chosen and accepted in a way she never felt growing up with her father and stepmother. She had believed that building her own family would fill that old, familiar gap. Instead, she felt it open again, wider and deeper. The loneliness was different this time. It wasn't just being alone, it was being abandoned after trusting someone with the most vulnerable parts of herself. She felt foolish for having believed so strongly, for having tied her sense of safety to someone else's promises. She thought about her father's warnings, the way he had pushed her to focus on her education and to be independent first. She wondered if things might have been different if she had listened, if having her own stability would have helped her choose differently, or leave sooner, or not feel so trapped now. The thoughts didn't bring comfort, only a dull ache of what-ifs. When there was nothing left to sell, no one else left to ask, she did the hardest thing she could imagine. She swallowed what little pride she had left and went back to her father. Walking into his home felt like stepping backward in time. She felt small again, exposed in a way she hadn't felt since childhood. Asking for help tasted bitter in her mouth, but desperation outweighed embarrassment. She didn't defend herself. She just said she needed help, for the children. Her father didn't rush to comfort her. He asked questions first. His probing wasn't cruel, but it wasn't gentle either. It made her feel exposed, like she had to lay out every failure for inspection. When she finished, he sat back and sighed, a long sound heavy with things left unsaid. "I warned you," he said finally. He told her he was disappointed, not only in the choices she had made, but in how much she had lost out. The words hurt, even though part of her had expected them. Then he told her to bring the children with her to live in his home. The acceptance wasn't warm, but it was solid. It held in the days that followed. He began to talk to her about the future in practical terms. He encouraged her to enroll in college, to build something that could not be taken away from her so easily. He offered to help, with childcare, with fees where he could. And he followed through. Slowly, structure returned to their lives. Her stepmother made sure to balance it out. From the beginning, she made it clear that this arrangement was not welcome. The comments were, about space, about noise, about how temporary this all needed to be. Then they sharpened. She reminded Madina, often, that this was not her home. That she had made her choices. That trouble seemed to follow her. One evening, when the children were out of earshot, her stepmother said what she had always implied. "You are just like your mother," she said. "No good. Always depending on someone else." The words landed with familiar precision. Old wounds reopened easily, they already knew the shape of the blade. Madina didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She had learned that nothing she said would change the verdict. If nothing else, she learned this: the greatest love she would ever rely on had to come from within her. Not from a husband's promises. Not from the approval she had chased since childhood. And not even from the fragile safety of being accepted by others. What carried her through the hardest days was the quiet decision to keep going, even when no one was clapping, even when she felt unseen. The trials she had endured didn't break her, she was building stability. It was enough to stand on while she began, slowly, to build a life that depended on no one's promises but her own.
How do you keep going when belonging has always felt conditional? And what if the place you ran to for love became the place you lost yourself?
This has been another tale from Echoes of Life Experiences. If you would like to hear more, please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for staying tuned.